The asteroid belt known as Corvo Cluster had never been quiet, but on this day, it was louder than usual. Metal groaned inside the mining station as drills cut through rock 2 kilometers below the surface. Dust floated in the low-gravity corridors, catching the orange light of warning lamps that never seemed to switch off. Daniel Voss was under a broken conveyor line when the alarm started. He did not jump. He did not even look up right away. He simply reached for his wrench, tightened one more bolt, and muttered to the machine above him. "You picked the worst times to break," he said. The station's AI, known simply as Second Voice, spoke through the speaker clipped to his collar. "In my defense, the timing was not intentional. Also, you should probably see this." "See what?" A ship just entered the belt. A big one. Draconi design. Daniel slid out from under the conveyor and sat up. Grease covered his hands and one side of his face. He was not a soldier. He was not important. He fixed things that broke, and things on this station broke often. But even he knew what a Draconi warship meant. The Corvo cluster held rare minerals used in long-range engines, and both humans and the Draconi Empire claimed rights to mine it. For 2 years, the dispute had stayed quiet, handled through slow talks and paperwork nobody enjoyed. That quiet was clearly ending. He walked to the observation deck, still wiping his hands on a rag. Through the thick window, the ship hung in space like a blade turned sideways, dark plating reflecting the dim starlight. It was easily 10 times the size of the station. Director Kaminsky was already there, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was a heavy-set man who preferred numbers and schedules to conflict. Numbers didn't threaten to destroy a station in one pass. They didn't send a diplomat, Kaminsky said, mostly to himself. They sent a warship. "Maybe it's just for show," Daniel offered. "With the Draconi, showing up is the negotiation." Daniel had heard stories about the Draconi Empire, mostly secondhand, mostly exaggerated, or so he had assumed. They were a species of massive, dragon-like warriors, intelligent and proud, who judged every other race by strength alone. Diplomacy with them usually meant one side backing down before a word was spoken. A smaller shuttle detached from the warship and approached the station's dock. Kaminsky straightened his uniform, though there was no fixing the nervous look on his face. Daniel simply stayed where he was, arms crossed, watching. "You should not be up here for this," Kaminsky said. "Conveyor's still broken. I'll head back down after." "Daniel, this is serious." "I know it's serious. I'm still going to fix the conveyor." The airlock hissed open, and the delegation stepped through. First came Overseer Rel, a tall Draconi official in dark ceremonial armor, scales a deep blue, eyes sharp and unfriendly. Behind him walked 2 armed escorts. And behind them, ducking low to fit through the doorway, came something the size of a small shuttlecraft itself. The room seemed to grow colder. Carzel stepped into the station corridor, and every human present felt the weight of its presence before they understood why. It was not simply large. It moved with a kind of certainty, as though the floor itself existed only because Carzel allowed it to. Dark red scales caught the light like polished stone. Its eyes, gold and slitted, swept across the room once, cataloging every living thing in it. Kaminsky took an involuntary step back. The 2 escorts behind Rel straightened further, as if trying to look smaller by comparison. Even the station's own security officers, usually calm under pressure, shifted their weight and said nothing. "This is Carzel," Overseer Rel announced, his voice carrying an edge of satisfaction. "Fleet commander of the 3rd Talon. It has ended 11 territorial disputes without a single shot fired, because no species foolish enough to face it has ever needed a second warning." Kaminsky's throat worked before he managed a reply. "We are willing to discuss the terms of the mining rights peacefully." "There is nothing to discuss," Rel said. "You will vacate the cluster within 1 cycle, or Carzel will remove the obstacle personally." Daniel, still standing near the back with grease on his hands, watched the exchange with a flat, unimpressed expression. Not because he doubted the danger. He simply had not yet decided to be afraid of it, the way he hadn't yet decided the conveyor below deck was unfixable. Carzel's head turned. Its huge eyes settled on him, and it seemed to notice, for the first time, that one human in this trembling room did not look away. "You," Carzel said, its voice deep enough to vibrate through the floor plating. "Why do you not lower your gaze?" The room went silent. Kaminsky looked ready to answer for him, to apologize, to do anything to smooth the moment over. But Daniel spoke first, calm and plain, the way he might answer a question about a broken machine. "Because I'm trying to figure out if you're actually here to fight, or just here to look scary," Daniel said. "Those are two different problems, and I've only got time to deal with one of them today." Overseer Rel's escorts froze. Kaminsky's face went pale. Even second voice, listening through Daniel's collar speaker, stayed uncharacteristically quiet. Carzel did not answer immediately. Its great head lowered slightly, not in submission, but in focus, studying the small, unarmed, unimpressed humans standing before it, as if seeing something it did not expect to find on this small, forgotten mining station at the edge of Draconi territory. Nobody moved for a long moment. The hum of the station's life support system seemed unusually loud in the silence, as if even the machines were waiting to see what would happen next. Overseer Rel recovered first, his composure snapping back into place like a mask. "Forgive the human's insolence, Commander. This one is clearly of low rank. Allow me to correct him." "No," Carzel said, without looking away from Daniel. "I did not ask you to speak." Rel's mouth closed immediately. His escorts exchanged a nervous glance, but said nothing. Kaminsky stepped forward, hands raised slightly, trying to smooth the moment before it turned into something worse. "Commander, please excuse my engineer. He does not fully understand the customs of your people. We are prepared to discuss the mining terms in a civilized manner." "I am not offended," Carzel said. Its voice was steady, almost curious now instead of threatening. "I am confused. Every creature that stands before me lowers its eyes. Every creature bows its head, or begs, or runs. This one does none of these things." "With respect," Daniel said, "I didn't know I was supposed to. Nobody handed me a manual." A faint sound came from Carzel's throat, something between a growl and something that might have been closer to a laugh, though it was impossible to tell with a creature like this. "You mock me," Carzel said. "No," Daniel said. "I'm just being honest. You're the size of a shuttle, you've got teeth like construction equipment, and apparently you've ended 11 fights without throwing a punch. I get why everyone in this room is nervous. I'm nervous too. I'm just also busy, and I've got a broken conveyor 2 decks down that isn't going to fix itself." Kaminsky looked like he wanted to physically drag Daniel out of the room. Overseer Rel's tail flicked once, sharp and irritated, a gesture Daniel didn't understand but recognized as some kind of warning sign. "Do you understand what will happen if you insult a war dragon of the third Talon?" Rel said quietly, dangerously. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "That's kind of the problem. Nobody's told me the rules. So I'm just talking to it the way I'd talk to anyone else. If that's the wrong move, somebody should have briefed me before letting me walk up here covered in engine grease." Carzel lowered itself slightly, bringing its massive head closer to Daniel's level, though still towering above him. Its golden eyes studied every detail of Daniel's face, searching for the fear that should have been there and was not. "You are not a warrior," Carzel said. It was not a question. "No," Daniel said. "I fix things. Conveyors, drills, life support, whatever breaks. Mostly whatever breaks. And yet you speak to me as an equal." "I'm not saying I'm your equal in a fight," Daniel said. "You'd win that in about half a second, and we both know it. I'm just saying I don't see the point in pretending to be scared when what I actually am is confused about why you're threatening to blow up a mining station over some rocks." Rel's escorts tensed, clearly expecting Carzel to end the conversation with violence. Kaminsky's hand hovered near the emergency comm switch, ready to call for evacuation. But Carzel simply stayed where it was, studying Daniel with an intensity that had nothing to do with anger. "These are not simply rocks," Carzel said. "This cluster feeds the forges that arm 3 fleets. Its loss would weaken the Empire's border defenses for a generation." "Okay," Daniel said. "That's actually useful information. Nobody explained that part to us either. We were told it's a resource dispute, not a defense issue. If it's about your border security, that changes the entire conversation." For the first time, Overseer Rel looked uncertain, glancing toward Carzel as if waiting for permission to be angry. Carzel, however, straightened slightly, its enormous head tilting. "You wish to negotiate," Carzel said. "I wish somebody would actually explain what's going on before deciding to remove an entire station full of people," Daniel said. "That seems fair to me." Kaminsky found his voice again, quieter now, more careful. Commander, if there is a genuine defense concern, we can discuss shared access or alternative extraction sites. We are not here to threaten the Empire's security. We didn't even know that was the issue. Carzel was silent for a long moment. Its tail, thick as a tree trunk, swept slowly across the floor behind it, the only sign of the creature's uncertainty. No species has ever asked me why, Carzel said finally, its voice quieter than before, almost thoughtful. They ask only how to survive me. Daniel shrugged, an oddly casual gesture in a room still thick with tension. Maybe that's the problem. If all anyone ever does is bow their head and hope you go away, you never actually get to explain yourself. Seems lonely, honestly. Carzel's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something closer to surprise. The great dragon had faced armies, fleets, and entire governments who trembled at its name. It had never once been called lonely. Overseer Rel opened his mouth to interject, but Carzel raised one massive clawed hand, silencing him without a word. You, Carzel said to Daniel, will speak with me further. Alone. Kaminsky's face went white. Commander, I don't think that's. It was not a request, Carzel said, and for the first time since arriving, something in its voice sounded almost like respect. The small conference room on the station had never held a Draconi war dragon before. It was built for 6 people at most, with a scuffed table and a wall screen that flickered when the station's power dipped. Carzel barely fit through the doorway, and once inside, it had to fold itself down into a low crouch just to avoid crushing the ceiling panels. Daniel sat across from it, still in his work clothes, still smelling faintly of engine grease. Second voice had gone quiet in his ear, though he suspected the AI was recording every second of this for the station logs, and probably for its own amusement. You could have refused, Carzel said, once the door had sealed. Most creatures would have found an excuse to avoid being alone with me. I thought about it, Daniel admitted. But you didn't seem like you were about to eat me. And if you were, running probably wouldn't have helped much anyway. Carzel's tail shifted against the floor, a low scraping sound. You assume correctly. I do not attack the unarmed, and I do not kill for sport, contrary to what your people may believe. Good to know. Wish someone had mentioned that before you showed up looking like the end of the world. The reputation serves a purpose, Carzel said. Fear ends conflicts before they begin. Fewer die that way. Daniel considered that for a moment. I get the logic. Doesn't sound like much fun, though. Always being the thing everyone's afraid of. Carzel's golden eyes fixed on him again, studying him the way it had in the corridor, as if trying to solve a puzzle it had never encountered before. You keep speaking of things being fun, or lonely, or fair. These are not concepts I associate with combat readiness. Maybe that's because you've only ever talked to people who were too scared to say anything real, Daniel said. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just don't really know how else to talk. I fix machines for a living. Machines don't care if you're polite. They care if you understand how they work. And do you understand how I work? Daniel almost laughed. Not even a little. You're the strangest thing I've ever seen, and I once rebuilt a fusion reactor with parts scavenged from 3 different ship models. But I figure you're not that different from anyone else, underneath all the scales and the reputation. You want something. You're trying to get it without unnecessary damage. That's basically every negotiation I've ever seen, just with bigger teeth. Carzel made a low sound in its throat again, that same almost laugh from before. You reduced the fiercest war dragon of the 3rd Talon to a negotiation tactic. I mean, aren't you? The question hung in the air. Carzel did not answer immediately. Its claws tapped once against the metal floor, thoughtful. I was hatched into war, Carzel said finally. My clutch siblings and I were tested from birth. Strength was survival. Weakness was removed, quietly, before it could shame the clutch. I was the last of 11 to survive to adulthood. Daniel's easy expression faded slightly. That's rough. It is our way, Carzel said, though something in its tone suggested it was not entirely at peace with that fact. Every creature I have faced since has either matched that strength or bowed before it. There has been no third option. Until now. Because I'm too dumb to know I'm supposed to be scared? Because you are the first to speak to me as though I were simply another person in the room, Carzel said. Not a monster. Not a god. A person. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, considering that. For what it's worth, I don't think that makes you weak. Seems like it'd take more strength to actually explain yourself than to just make everyone run away. Carzel's eyes narrowed slightly, though not in anger. You test my patience with such statements. Maybe, but you haven't eaten me yet, so I figure I've got a little room to push my luck. For a long moment, the war dragon studied him in silence. Then, unexpectedly, it spoke again, its voice lower, quieter than before. Overseer Rel expects me to end this dispute the way I always have. A show of strength. The humans yield the cluster, or I destroy this station as a lesson to the rest of your kind. Daniel's stomach tightened, though his face didn't show it. And what do you want to do? I do not yet know, Carzel admitted. This has never happened before. Well, Daniel said slowly, for what it's worth, I don't think blowing up a mining station full of people is going to make either of our sides look good. And I still don't actually understand why the cluster matters so much to you. Beyond, it feeds the forges. Maybe instead of deciding whether to destroy us or not, we could just talk about it properly. Like people. Carzel's massive head tilted again, an oddly thoughtful gesture for a creature of its size. You propose a contest. I didn't, actually, but sure, if that's how your people like to settle things, I'm listening. A test, Carzel said. Not of strength. You could not survive that, and we both know it. A test of worth. If you prove your people possess something of value beyond fear and submission, I will bring that truth back to the Empire myself and argue against destruction of this station. Daniel exhaled slowly. This was not how he had expected his day under a broken conveyor to end. And if I don't prove it? Carzel's golden eyes held his without blinking. Then Overseer Rel gets exactly what he came here for. The weight of that statement settled over the small room like a physical thing. Daniel thought of Kaminsky outside, of the 200 people on this station who had no idea their fate now rested on a conversation between an engineer and a dragon. He thought of the conveyor still sitting broken 2 decks below, a problem that suddenly felt very small. All right, Daniel said finally, steadying his voice. Then let's figure out what kind of test proves something worth proving. Word of the contest spread through the station faster than any announcement could have managed. By the time Daniel stepped out of the conference room, nearly every worker on shift had found some excuse to be near the main corridor, watching the enormous red-scaled dragon duck its way toward the station's central hangar. Kaminsky caught Daniel by the arm the moment he was clear of Carzel's hearing. Have you lost your mind? A contest? Against that. It wasn't exactly my idea, Daniel said. But it beats the alternative, which was apparently the station gets destroyed as a lesson. So you know, small wins. What kind of contest? We're still working that part out. Overseer Rel, standing near the hangar entrance with his arms crossed, looked far more pleased with the situation than Kaminsky did. A physical contest, of course, he said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. Strength against strength. It is the only true measure. That's not fair, Kaminsky snapped. No human can match a Draconi war dragon in raw strength. You know that. Which is precisely the point, Rel said, satisfaction dripping from his voice. The outcome will settle the matter beyond dispute. Daniel glanced at Carzel, who had remained silent through the exchange, watching the crowd gather with an unreadable expression. Is that the deal? Straight strength contest. Overseer Rel speaks for tradition, Carzel said slowly. But tradition is not the same as fairness. I did not agree to a contest you could not possibly win. That would prove nothing except what we already know. Rel's confident expression faltered. Commander, the terms were never yours to set, Carzel said, and the finality in its voice silenced the overseer immediately. Carzel turned its great head back toward Daniel. You will face 3 trials. One of endurance, one of problem-solving, one of strength, so that Overseer Rel's pride is not entirely wounded. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the gathered crowd, quickly stifled. Daniel allowed himself a small, tired smile. Fair enough. Endurance and problem-solving, I can work with. Strength, I'm going to lose, but I appreciate you not pretending otherwise. The first trial began within the hour, out of necessity, since the station's hangar bay could only be sealed off from work operations for a limited window. The endurance trial was simple in concept. Both competitors would remain in the station's decompression training chamber, a cramped, airless simulation space used for emergency drills, for as long as they could withstand the mounting pressure and cold before the automatic systems intervened. For Carzel, built for the void of deep space combat, this was barely a challenge. For Daniel, it was agony from the second minute onward. His lungs burned, his fingers went numb, and the readout on his suit display blinked warnings he chose to ignore. He did not think about the pain. He thought about the 200 people on the station who did not know their future was being decided in a decompression chamber by a mechanic they mostly recognized only by his voice over the comm system. He thought about his mother, who used to tell him that giving up was always a choice, never a requirement. He held on. When the automatic systems finally forced the chamber to stabilize, both competitors were still standing. Carzel, unaffected, watched Daniel collapse to one knee, gasping, refusing help from the medics waiting nearby. "You should have signaled for release minutes ago," Carzel said, something like concern threading through its deep voice. "Didn't want to," Daniel managed between breaths. "Wanted to see how long I could actually go." "That is not wisdom. That is stubbornness." "Most days," Daniel said, forcing himself upright. "I don't see much difference." The second trial, the strength contest, was over almost before it began. Carzel lifted a section of scrap hull plating that would have taken the station's heavy loader machine several minutes to move, tossing it aside as though it weighed nothing. Daniel, given the same task, could not budge it an inch. He didn't pretend otherwise, didn't strain for show. He simply stepped back, nodded once, and said, "Yeah, that one's yours." Overseer Rel looked deeply satisfied by this outcome, muttering something about expectations being met. The final trial, problem-solving, took place in the station's damaged reactor control room, an area that had been slowly failing for months due to a fault Daniel had never quite found the time to fully repair. Carzel was given full access to the ship's technical schematics, translated hastily by second voice into a format the Dragon could parse. Daniel was given nothing but his tools and his own memory of the system he had worked on for years. The task was simple: stabilize the failing power core before it overloaded, using whatever means available, within a fixed time limit. Carzel approached the problem with raw analytical power, running calculations at a pace no human could match, cross-referencing failure points against known engineering principles. But the station's systems were old, patched together over years by mismatched parts and improvised repairs that existed nowhere in any official schematic. Daniel, by contrast, did not need the schematics. He knew this reactor the way he knew his own hands, every strange quirk, every jury-rigged fix layered atop older jury-rigged fixes. While Carzel calculated the theoretically correct solution, Daniel simply reached past a compromised regulator, rerouted a secondary coolant line with a length of spare cable, and manually recalibrated the output by feel and instinct built from years of keeping this station alive on a shoestring budget. The core stabilized under Daniel's hands nearly 90 seconds before Carzel completed its calculations. The hangar fell silent. Overseer Rel's confident expression finally cracked. Carzel lowered its massive head to examine the stabilized reactor core, then turned to look at Daniel, who stood there wiping grease from his hands with the same tired, unimpressed expression he had worn since the very beginning of this entire ordeal. "You solved it faster than I could calculate," Carzel said, something unfamiliar coloring its voice. Not anger, not disappointment, something closer to genuine respect. "I didn't calculate anything," Daniel said. "I just knew this reactor. Spent enough late nights with it to know its moods." Carzel was quiet for a long moment, studying the stabilized readout, then studying Daniel again, as if seeing him for the first time. "2 trials to 1, Carzel said finally. "In your favor." The hangar was silent in a way it had never been before. 200 people stood crowded along the upper walkways. Workers who had abandoned their shifts without permission, medics who had come to treat injuries, and stayed to witness something none of them could explain to anyone back home. At the center of it all stood Carzel, the fiercest war dragon of the Third Talon, staring down at the readout of a stabilized reactor core that a single unarmed mechanic had fixed with spare cable and instinct. Overseer Rel was the first to break the silence, and his voice carried none of the smug satisfaction from before. "This proves nothing," he said sharply. "One human, skilled with machines. It does not speak for an entire species. It does not change what they are. It changes what I believe they were," Carzel said, without turning to look at him. Commander, with respect, the terms of this contest were symbolic. A curiosity. The Empire's border security cannot rest on the performance of one mechanic in a decompression chamber. No, Carzel agreed. It cannot rest on that alone. But it also cannot rest on a decision made from nothing but assumption and old habit. Rel's tail lashed once against the hangar floor, sharp and controlled, betraying the anger beneath his composed exterior. You would risk the forges, the fleets, an entire generation of defense, because one human refused to lower his eyes. I would risk reconsidering a judgment I have never once questioned in 300 cycles of service, Carzel said, and for the first time, its voice carried an edge that made even Rel take a half step back. That is not weakness, Overseer. That is what strength is supposed to look like, when it is honest with itself. Daniel, still catching his breath near the reactor console, watched the exchange with a complicated expression. He had not expected any of this. He had woken up that morning thinking about a broken conveyor belt, not about becoming the reason an alien empire might reconsider its entire foreign policy. For what it's worth, Daniel said, stepping forward despite the ache still settled deep in his chest from the endurance trial. I'm not trying to prove humanity is stronger than the Draconi. That would be a lie, and you'd both know it. Carzel could probably level this station without much effort. I'm just trying to prove that strength isn't the only thing worth measuring. And what would you measure instead? Rel asked, his tone somewhere between mockery and genuine curiosity. Daniel considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things, slowly and without flourish. Whether someone keeps trying when they know they're going to lose. Whether they tell the truth even when a lie would be easier. Whether they fix what's broken instead of just replacing it with something bigger and scarier. I don't know. Maybe that's not how your people measure worth. But it's how I measure it, and it's gotten me through a lot of long nights on this station. Carzel's golden eyes settled on Daniel again, and something in its posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable to those close enough to notice. The great war dragon, who had never once yielded ground to any species outside its own, seemed almost uncertain, caught between 300 cycles of unbroken tradition and something new it did not yet have words for. Overseer Rel believes I should end this now, Carzel said quietly. Reassert dominance. Claim the cluster. Return to the fleet with a story of another species properly humbled. And what do you believe? Daniel asked. I believe, Carzel said slowly, that I have spent 300 cycles being feared, and not once have I been understood. I believe this human mechanic, with no weapon and no army, has done more to earn my respect in a single day than any general, any diplomat, any war dragon I have faced in single combat. Rel's expression twisted with something close to alarm. Commander, you cannot mean to. I have not decided what I mean to do, Carzel said, cutting him off. But I will not decide it standing here, with 200 frightened humans watching and an overseer whispering tradition into one ear like it is the only truth that exists. The hangar remained tense, Rel fuming silently near the entrance, the gathered crowd exchanging uncertain glances, unsure whether to hope or fear what came next. Kaminsky had made his way to the front of the group, standing near Daniel now, his earlier panic replaced by something closer to cautious awe. Whatever happens, Kaminsky murmured to Daniel, you may have just changed everything for this entire station. For humanity, maybe. I was just trying to keep everyone from getting killed, Daniel said. I don't know if I changed anything. That's kind of up to him. Carzel lowered itself slightly, bringing its enormous head down until it was almost level with Daniel's, the closest the massive creature had come to him since their very first meeting in the corridor. Its golden eyes, ancient and unreadable, studied him with an intensity that made the entire hangar hold its breath. You never once begged, Carzel said quietly, so only Daniel could hear. Not for your life. Not for your station. Not even when victory seemed impossible in the endurance trial. Didn't seem like the point, Daniel said. Begging doesn't fix anything. Figured I'd rather spend the energy on trying. Something shifted in Carzel's expression, something that on a human face might have been called a smile, though on the war dragon it was subtler, a slight softening around the eyes, a stillness that had not been there before. 300 cycles, Carzel said again, almost to itself. And it took one exhausted mechanic with grease on his hands to teach me that strength without understanding is only half of what I claimed it to be. The hangar waited, silent, as the fiercest dragon in the Third Talon fleet made a decision none of them could have predicted. Nobody in the hangar moved. Nobody dared to. 200 people, mechanics and technicians and off-duty guards, stood frozen along the walkways, watching the fiercest war dragon of the Third Talon fleet lower its massive head toward a single exhausted human standing in the middle of the room with grease still staining his hands. For a long moment, Daniel simply stood there, unsure what was happening, unsure if this was some final test he had not been told about. Then Carzel's head dropped lower, past the point of simple observation, past the point of curiosity, until its snout nearly touched the hangar floor directly in front of him. It was not a killing strike. It was not a threat display. It was, unmistakably, a bow. Overseer Rel made a strangled sound of protest from near the entrance, but even he seemed too stunned to form actual words. The two Draconi escorts behind him stood rigid, eyes wide, witnessing something that, by every account either of them had ever heard, was simply not supposed to happen. Carzel did not bow. Carzel had never bowed. Not to emperors. Not to rival war dragons. Not to any creature it had faced in 300 cycles of service. "Commander," Rel finally managed, his voice cracking with disbelief, "you cannot. This is not tradition. This is not." "I am aware of what tradition dictates," Carzel said, its voice steady despite the position it held, head lowered before an unarmed mechanic on a small mining station at the edge of Draconi territory. "Tradition dictates that strength alone determines worth. That fear is the only language other species understand. I have followed that tradition for 300 cycles, and today, for the first time, I met someone who taught me it was incomplete." Daniel, still processing what was happening, found his voice at last. "You really don't have to do this. I wasn't trying to prove I was better than you. I was just trying to be honest. That is precisely why I am doing it," Carzel said, raising its head slowly back to its full towering height. Though something in its posture had changed, some old rigid certainty replaced by something softer, more thoughtful. "You did not seek my respect. You did not perform for it, or beg for it, or fight for it in the way my people expect. You simply were what you were, honestly and without pretense, even when facing something that could have ended your life in a single moment. That is a strength I did not know existed until today." Kaminsky, still standing nearby, looked as though he might need to sit down. Second voice, through Daniel's collar speaker, finally broke its long silence with a single quiet observation. "For the record, I am recording all of this. Nobody back home is going to believe it otherwise." Overseer Rel, recovering some of his composure, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Commander, what of the mining rights? The forges? The border defenses you spoke of?" Carzel turned toward him, and though its posture had softened toward Daniel, it hardened again, facing Rel. "We will share the cluster. Human engineers possess a skill for improvisation my own forces lack, the ability to build solutions from what exists rather than what should exist by design. That skill has value to the Empire beyond what any dispute over territory could offer alone." "Shared extraction rights," Kaminsky repeated slowly, as though testing the words for the first time. "With the Draconi Empire. It is not the outcome I arrived expecting to deliver," Carzel admitted. "But it is the outcome I believe is correct, and I have learned, today, that those two things are not always the same." Rel looked as though he wanted to argue further, but something in Carzel's expression silenced him before he could try. Whatever objections the overseer held, he clearly understood they would not change what had already happened in front of 200 witnesses. In the days that followed, word of the encounter spread far beyond the small mining station in the Corvo cluster. It reached Draconi command structures accustomed to stories of fear and submission, stories that suddenly seemed incomplete beside this new account of an unarmed human who had earned, rather than been given, the respect of the Empire's fiercest war dragon. It reached human colonies scattered across the outer systems, giving people who had long felt small and overlooked in the wider galaxy a reason to stand a little straighter. Daniel himself remained mostly unchanged by the sudden attention, though he did finally get around to fixing that broken conveyor belt, 3 days later than planned, muttering the entire time about how it had picked the absolute worst week to break down. Carzel remained in the Corvo cluster for several more days before departing, overseeing the initial terms of the shared mining agreement personally, a level of direct involvement Overseer Rel found deeply unusual for a war dragon of its rank. On the day of its departure, Carzel sought out Daniel one final time, finding him elbow-deep in machinery, as usual. "You did not ask what changes for you," Carzel said. "Others in your position would have sought reward, recognition, advancement." Daniel shrugged, wiping grease from his hands with the same rag he always seemed to be carrying. "Didn't really do it for a reward. Just didn't want anyone to die over some rocks. Seemed like a reasonable goal." "That," Carzel said, "is precisely why it mattered." The war dragon turned to leave, then paused at the airlock, looking back one final time at the small, unremarkable human who had changed something ancient and unquestioned within it. "Perhaps," Carzel said, "strength was never about the size of the head that bows. Perhaps it was always about knowing when bowing means something, and when it means nothing at all." With that, Carzel departed, leaving behind a station, a species, and an empire that would never quite view each other the same way again, all because one ordinary mechanic had refused to lower his eyes when the galaxy expected him to.